Hello, good day to all. So, I'm Engineer Jerome S. Agas, MSCPE of Data Science and Engineering at PUP. So, this is the reference format of the research paper. So, paper number 2, the title is The Importance of Fuzzy Logic and Application Areas in Engineering Research. Who have done the work? So, one is Miss Aruna Bajpai. Okay, and then pangalawa po is Mr. Virendra Singh Kushwa. Kaya the letter B, what were their goals or objectives? Okay, the main aim is to survey about the fuzzy logic applications and finding their recent contributions by using the fuzzy theory and their computational ability. So, isa pa is to provide a detailed study of fuzzy logic. So, yon. Letter C, what were the research question, if any? Not applicable because the data is from the existing articles. Okay, letter D, what were their methods in terms of, but not limited to, how have they gathered relevant data? So, who are the participants? Not applicable because they get from existing research. Okay, how is the data gathering set up? So, from the survey of different article and research papers. So, the third one is what are the tools and techniques used in the data gathering? So, from the survey of different article and research papers again. So, the number 2, how do they form the data set? So, how do they clean the data? First is the data set is preprocessed in the first phase to reduce the unwanted text and additional characters. Second is the data is preprocessed for obtaining the valuable features. Third is after the selection of the features, the list of features is subdivided into 2 parts. First contain the ratio of 70% of the entire input samples and the rest is the 30%. Third is how do they process the data and or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? So the answer is that term frequency inverse document frequency or TF-IDF concept is implemented. Neuro-fuzzy model is used. Supervised learning algorithms. So letter E, what were their findings? The paper provides detailed understanding about the application and acceptability of the fuzzy-based system in various industries and organizations. So another is the data model is introduced for text mining application where the key aim is to categorize the text according to the user sentiments and their orientations according to the product review. What were the gaps in their studies and or findings? So one is a proposal of utilizing the technology in text mining domain as an application for future design and development. So let's proceed to the paper number 3, a fuzzy logic approach to target tracking. Okay, letter A, who have done the work? So first is Ching Wang Tao, and second is Willie E. Thompson. Letter B, what were their goals or objectives? Their objectives, this paper discusses a target tracking problem. Letter C, what were their research question, if any? Not applicable because the data is experimental. So letter D, what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? Okay, number 1, how have they gathered the relevant data? Who are the participants? The participant is the objects within vicinity of track, okay, or the map. So next is how is the data gathering set up? So from moving target over time. Okay, next is what are the tools or techniques used in the data gathering? Number 1 is simulation. Okay. Number 2, how did they form the data set? Next is how did they clean the data? How do they clean the data? Fuzzy partition and membership function. Second is the fuzzy rule base, a combination of the fuzzy control rules. And the third one is the fuzzification. How did they process the data and or how did they develop the fuzzy logic? So the answer is a nonlinear filter based on the fuzzy if then rules is developed. Letter E, what were their findings? Their findings is a comparison with Kalman filter is made and empirical result shows that the performance of the fuzzy filter is better. Okay, what were their gaps in their studies or findings? Okay, first is the target tracking problem in which no dynamic mathematical model is explicitly assumed. Okay, next is the problem considered here is that of the target tracking based on measurements taken in a noisy environment. Okay, let's proceed to the next paper, paper number 4, the application of fuzzy logic in transportation planning. Letter A, who has or have done the work? So first is Amrita Sarkar. Amrita Sarkar. Number 2 is the G. Sahu or Dr. G. Sahu. Okay, and the third is the Dr. U.C. Sahu. Okay, letter B, what were their goals and objectives? Okay, to solve the various traffic and transportation planning problems. What were their research questions, if any? Not applicable because the data is experimental. So what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? Number one, how have they gathered the relevant data? Who are the participants? Passengers. Okay, next is how is the data gathering setup? So from the passengers record. Okay, next is what are the tools and techniques used in the data gathering? Not applicable. Okay, number two, how do they form the data set? So how did they clean the data? The process of fuzzy inference involves defining if-then rules. Next is defining membership functions. And next is applying logical operations. How do they process the data and or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? Number one is the trip generation from I to J, trip distribution, the conceptual fuzzy model. Okay, this is the picture. Okay, next is the model split. Most of the graph is the pie chart. Under the model split, they have a description of fuzzy travel time difference over time. Okay, membership function. Next is the share of mass transit. Next is the zone, pairs, and range. Next is the mean max gravity method. Next is the route choice. Next is the traffic assignment. Third is a fuzzy set of perceived link travel time. Deterministic link travel time. So under the fuzzy set, next is the actual link travel time. Fuzzy set of perceived link travel time. Fuzzy set perceived path travel time. Fuzzy shortest path or FSP algorithm. So letter E, what were their findings? So when solving a large number of different traffic and transportation problems, this is what we actually do. Map a crisp input vector into a crisp scalar output. Letter F, what were their gaps in their studies and or findings? So first is this paper presents an analysis of the results achieved using fuzzy logic to model complex traffic and transportation processes. So let's proceed to the next paper, paper number 5. The title is the application of fuzzy logic in academic setup. Okay, number 1, letter A, who has have done the work? So first is Sahur Ahmad. Okay, next is Serish Waris. Okay, letter B, what were their goals or objectives? One is we have estimate student GPA at any point by using fuzzy logic with the help of fuzzy rules based on information of previous marks and study timing. So this is a picture. Letter C, what were the research question, if any? So not applicable because the data is already recorded. Okay, letter D, what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? So who gathered the relevant data? Who are their participants? So academic students in the university. Okay, number 2, how is the data gathering set up? Okay, from student record, from their exam. Okay, what are the tools and techniques used in the data gathering? Not applicable. Okay, number 2, how did they form the data set? How did they clean the data? Serish and Ahmad, or the 3D surface from 2 inputs and 1 output. So it looks like a 3D. And how do they process the data and or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? So number 1 is the GUI tools building fuzzy inference systems in the fuzzy logic toolbox. So nakapaloob sa kanya is the fuzzy inference system or FIS editor. Next is membership function editor. Rule editor. Next is the rule viewer and the surface viewer. Okay, ito pa yung kaninang 3D kan, yung surface viewer na yan. So what were their findings? So we can see where lower marks and low timing, then GPA is low. And the average, and by increasing the study timing, our GPA increase and move up to the yellow color or the color where GPA high. So yan, may mga picture po tayo dyan. Okay, letter F, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? So first is the traditional mathematics include the set theory fails to handle an irrational way. Okay, let's proceed to the next paper. Paper number 7, fuzzy logic and its application in football team rankings. So it's all about sports ranking. Letter A, who has have done the work? So the author is Wenyu Zheng, and number 2 is Junhong Lee. Okay, letter B, what were their goals and objectives? So first is we propose the ranking algorithm based on the fuzzy clustering and obtain the ranking result. That's what it looks like. So letter C, what were the research question, if any? So not applicable because the data is recorded through the scores. So what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? Number 1, how have they gathered relevant data? Who are their participants? The 12 football teams in China. So next is how is the data gathering set up? So from table 1, the scores of 12 football teams. Number 2, from the table number 2, the number of wins, losses, and draws. And lastly, from the table number 3, the number of goals against, and their difference. And what are the tools or techniques used in the data gathering? Not applicable, it's already recorded. Okay, how did they form the data set? How did they clean the data? NA. How do they process the data, and or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? So, ayan. Sunod-sunod po. The degree of fuzzy similarity between the object X and J, construct the fuzzy similarity matrix, the lambda cutting matrix, dynamic clustering graph, multi-criteria assessment method, the technique for order preference by similarity solution of or the top Cs. Okay, what were their findings? The study shows that our fuzzy logic method is reliable and stable when the parameters change in certain range. So next is after calculating the fuzzy equivalence matrix of fuzzy similarity matrix R and the classification result and combining the information from tables 2 and 3, we think that team 4 is ranked as number 12. Okay, letter F, what were the gap for the studies? So the ranking of the football teams. So yan po yung answer niya. Okay, gamit yung algorithm kanina. Okay, so let's proceed to the next paper, the number 8. Application of fuzzy set and fuzzy logic to economic problems. Study literature, review of journal. Okay, letter A, who have done the work? Number 1 is Suripa. And number 2 is Setriu Slita. What were their goals or objectives? So the first is aims to describe the set of application and fuzzy logic on the economy. These are the variables. So letter C, what were the research and questions, if any? So not applicable because the data is from existing research. So what were their methods in terms of, but not limited to? Number 1, how have they gathered the relevant data? Who are the participants? Not applicable because from existing research. So how is the data gathering set up? Not applicable. What are the tools or techniques used in the data gathering? Not applicable. So how do they form the data set? How do they clean the data? Not applicable. Okay, the number 3, how do they process data or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? So through the fuzzy set theory. Letter E, what were their findings? As for some reason, it is advisable to use fuzzy logic is. So next is conceptually easy to use because it is based on a simple mathematical concept. Next is their tolerance to uncertainty data. So next is a program to model the system that is not linear and complex. Letter F, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? So number 1 is the problem still faced over the year is still the presence of obstacle how to create a formula approach to economic modeling. But with the development of increasingly sophisticated technology, it must be followed by the progress of the method approach refers to the development of mathematics and computer technology. So upgrade. Next paper is the paper 9. A new interval type 2 fuzzy logic system under dynamic environment. Application to financial. Okay, letter A, who have done the work? So number 1 is Akihiko Takahashi. And number 2 is Soichiro Takahashi. Letter B, what were their goals and objectives? New interval type 2 fuzzy logic system or RT2 FLS for financial statement with time varying parameters adaptive to real-time data streams by using an online learning method based on a state space framework. So letter C, what were the research question, if any? No. And A, because the data is recorded from Bloomberg. Okay. How have they gathered relevant data? Who are the participants? And A again, because the data is from Bloomberg. So how is the data gathering setup? So through Bloomberg, time series return data of stock market price indexes, future and 10-year bond future for US, Japan, Germany, and UK. So it is also from Bloomberg. So what are the tools and techniques used in the data gathering? So through Bloomberg, again, the time series return data of stock market price indexes, future and 10-year bond future for US, Japan, Germany, and UK. Okay, how did they form the data set? How do they clean the data? So no need for data cleaning. How do they process the data and or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? So through the Bayesian filtering algorithm. Number 2 is a state space model. So letter A, what were their findings? So as a result, it is shown that the IT2 FLS holds its advantage against the Type 1 FLS even though the both Type 1 and Type 2 models have the adaptive time varying parameters, which is an unexplored topic for empirical studies of this area. So letter F, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? So this proposal is helpful for financial application which often involve the various practical complex constraints because general. So next paper is the number 13, the application of fuzzy logic, a review. So who have done the work? So 1 is a Komar B. Plenchuar. Number 2 is Ropali S. Kokate or Kokate. Okay, what were their goals or objectives? To provide a review of fuzzy logic application in different fields. So what were the research questions, if any? Not applicable because this is only a review. Letter D, what were the methods in terms of but not limited to? How have they gathered the relevant data? Who are the participants? Not applicable because no data is needed. How is the gathering set up? Also, not applicable. And what are the tools and techniques used in the data gathering? So, consolidation of different article studies regarding the application of fuzzy logic. Okay, number 2, how did they form the data set? How did they clean the data? No need for data cleaning. So, number 3, how did they process the data and or how did they develop the fuzzy logic? Not applicable. So, letter E, what were their findings? So, Boolean logic or binary, that is two-valued logic, in use mainly 3 steps. They are fuzzification, inference system, and the fuzzification. Okay, so it looks like that. So, the letter F, lastly, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? This paper offers the idea of fuzzy logic and its uses in various branches. Okay, next paper is paper number 14, the fuzzy logic in development of fundamentals of pattern recognition. Okay, letter A, who have done the work? So, W. Pedrix. So, what were their goals and objectives? It will be indicated in how the symbolic part of computation is handled by fuzzy set and how neural set can contribute to specific numerical problems. So, what were the research questions, if any? How fuzzy set and fuzzy logic in particular can handle numerical and symbolic computation used in classification procedures. So, letter D, what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? Number 1, how have they gathered the relevant data? Next is, who are their participants? Human. How is the data gathering set up? So, to the cognitive, perspective, and linguistic way to evaluate grades of class membership. So, what are the tools and techniques used in the data gathering? Cognitive perspective also, and linguistic way to evaluate grade of class membership. So, they are the same. So, how do they form the data set? How do they clean the data? Symbolic and numerical computation. How do they process the data or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? So, truth evaluation and induce fuzzy sets. Letter E, what were their findings? So, the neural network is implemented in this scheme plays the role of an optimal mapping structure between two logical spaces. As these two spaces and a clear interpretation in terms of fuzzy sets, the way of the object, fuzzy truth values, in two spaces have to be tied together does not have the same clear logical interpretation, and because of that, should be determined in a numerical manner that is well captured by neurocomputations. So, ang haba. So, yan po siya. Letter F, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? Primordial interest in the understanding of principles of recognitions and classifications. So, yan. Last paper, paper number 15, a parametric representation of linguistic hedges in Zadeh's fuzzy logic. Number 1, letter A, who have done the work? So, V.N. Yun T.B. Ho. Yan. Next is Y. Nakamori. Letter B, what were their goals and objectives? So, model of the parametric representation of linguistic hedges in Sachs fuzzy logic. So, letter C, what were the research questions, if any? Not applicable. Letter D, what were the methods in terms of but not limited to? So, how have they gathered the relevant data? Who are their participants? Not applicable, but true linguistic variables. So, how is the data gathering set up? NA, but true linguistic variable also. And what are the tools and techniques used in the data gathering? NA, but true linguistic variable also. So, number 2, how did they form the data set? How did they clean the data? Through mathematical representation of linguistic hedges. How did they process the data and or how they develop the fuzzy logic? Through parametric membership function of linguistic truth values and algebraic structure of the linguistic truth space, or the 4 theories. Letter E, what were their findings? A new model of parametric representation of linguistic truth values has been proposed in this paper. It is shown that the model yields a method of efficiently computing linguistic truth expression accompanied with a rich algebraic structure of the linguistic truth domain. Namely, the Morgan algebra. It has been shown that our model is superior to the existing model under several intuitive criteria, both algebraically and computationally. Furthermore, the model proposed in this paper can also extended to an arbitrary linguistic variable with the shape of triangular and trapezoidal membership function of primary fuzzy set. So the feature, it is how look like triangle and the trapezoidal. Letter F, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? So fuzzy logic based on parametric representation of linguistic truth values. Okay, so that's all, and thank you.